Bismillah. Wow. I am excited and honored to start this year with this book, with this reading. It's something it's close to heart, music and sound and art and creativity and the cross-sectionality with spirituality and philosophy. So I'm deeply honored. I'm excited to be among amazing creatives and people, just amazing human beings. This is great. Thank God. If we can just maybe take maybe a minute or so to adjust ourselves and tune in, which I think is proper to the reading. Um, Hazrat Inayat Khan talks about tuning oneself in and being in harmony with one's inner self and with the environment. So if we can take a moment to find that space of harmony within ourselves, feel free to close your eyes. Feel free to maybe have a soft gaze and find that space within you that is already in a state of harmony. That space within you that is already in a state of peace. It doesn't require any work. See how the breath is already in tune with that space of harmony. Pay attention to that subtlety of that breath. And that even though we are miles apart, that somehow we are in that same harmonious space, connected to each other. And when you're ready, bring that space with you to the surface. Bring that space of harmony and peace to the surface, to yourself, and to everyone here with you on the call. Wow. We are here. Here we are. In this beautiful space with these beautiful hearts and beautiful people. Um, as you know from the reading, we're discussing the mysticism of sound and music introduced by Hazrat Inayat Khan, who I read this book a I think maybe a couple years ago, and over over New Year's Eve, myself and few people, Aziza was one of them, we rented a cabin in upstate New York, and we just chilled, trying to celebrate the New Year's, the coming of the new year. And there was just a lot of music and a lot of sound in that cabin, that at a certain point the cabin itself started to hum. And one of the people um, that was there, he brought this book, The Mysticism of Sound and Music. And I picked it up. It had a different cover though, because the cover that I have has an orange cover to it. And I'm like, wait a second, this looks so familiar. Uh, so I picked it up and I start reading it, and I was like, wait, what? It just looks all familiar. It didn't click because I read the book so long ago. And also this man who brought this book it feels like he lives this book so much. You can see it in his body, the way he moves. He's a dancer, he's a musician, so you can see it in how he's moving. It's like he's almost 2 inches off the ground in how he moves. And I was like, man, I gotta get back to reading this book. I was just so inspired. And when I came home, I looked for it and I found it. I was like, wait a second, it is the same book. And that's when I was like, man, this has to be the reading for the book club. Um, it's becoming more and more of a mission of mine to introduce more and more music and sound in my life. So I just took it as an excuse to to put myself on the spot to reading it. Um, for those of you who are not familiar with Hazrat Inayat Khan, I'm gonna read just a small little bio of of his, just kind of give a uh, so that we're all on the same page and know who's this person that wrote this book. So Hazrat Inayat Khan was born in 1882, and he passed away in 1927 at the age of 44. He was pretty young. I think he got sick at a young age, and um, maybe in early 40s, and passed away. He's an Indian Sufi master, musician, philosopher, and he's the one who introduced the mystical teachings of Sufism to the West. I'm not sure if he's the first one, but typically um, that's something that people recognize him for. He was born into a renowned family of musicians in India, and he was trained in classical Indian music and became a master of the veena. It's a string musical instrument. And he saw music as a sacred means of connecting to the divine, as um, a lot of musicians from that region do. Under the guidance of his Sufi teacher, Sheikh Muhammad Abu Hashim Madani, he realized that his true calling was not just in playing music, but also in awakening and tuning the souls. So in 1910, he left India to share Sufi wisdom beyond religious boundary, teaching that all life is a vibration and that harmony both within and between people is the highest spiritual attainment. He established the Sufi order in the West, emphasizing the power of sound, breath, and the spoken word as paths to inner realization. His teachings revolved around three key themes: the mysticism of sound, the idea that the universe itself is music, and all life is a vibration in the great cosmic harmony. Also, the power of the word. Speech and thought carry a resonance that can heal or harm, create or destroy. And the other theme is the path of the heart, which is the Sufi ideal. The Sufi ideal of transforming the ego through love, beauty, and devotion. Despite his great musical success, Inayat Khan made the ultimate sacrifice, which was kind of part in the book that he wrote also in the beginning, giving up his art to dedicate himself to tuning souls instead of instruments. I remember when I first read that, that was like, oof, sacrifice, like being a musician or being a poet or being an artist and sacrificing that art, like that's just, yeah. Um, he taught that each person is like a musical note in the great symphony of existence, and his work sought to bring people into deeper harmony with themselves and the universe. His legacy lives on through his writings, such as the book that we are reading, The Mysticism of Sound and Music, and through the continued work of his lineage in the Inayati order. His teachings continue to inspire seekers of all backgrounds. He's um, one of his order is considered a universalist Sufism. So they don't necessarily focus on the Islamic portion, but it's a more broader viewpoint. So they welcome all backgrounds, bridging words of music, spirituality, and self-transformation. So that's the man, Inayat Khan, Hazrat Inayat Khan. That's the man who we're reading, who we're pretty much in some kind of weird way invoking his spirit into what we're doing. Um, yeah, and I would love to kind of hear first impressions of of the reading. I know this is typically we start with this first impression, like what is it? What caught your attention from the reading? Um, if you did the reading, even if you just read, a paragraph or a quote or something like that, um, and yeah, we can go from there, and then we can discuss certain questions, and as we always do. So I would love to hear from you. Oh, also, if it's helpful, so that we don't jump or talk over each other, if we can use the react button on Zoom to raise a hand. I'm sure we kind of like this, how I raise my hand. um, yeah, okay. Aziza.
Okay, I have like a very little note. The line where he says, I've become his flute, and when he chooses, he plays his music. The people give me credit for this music, which in reality is not due to me, but to the musician. So from there, I thought of, how Allah says, I'm closer to you than your jugular vein. And when we listen to our intuition, inspiration may flow through and create itself into something tangible. Another line that caught me was reason gives birth to doubt, which destroys the thought power before it is able to fulfill its destiny. Which, yeah, I guess it in a way ties into the previous concept, because I know as a musician and artist in general and just person, I found like doubt has been like such a blockage, and I see the real results of like how it's blocking from stuff. So yeah, I really resonated with that.
Yeah, beautiful. Like there's, I think that that quote about reason and having giving space to doubt. Yeah, that was one of the big highlights, for me as well. And I'm sure we'll dive deeper into this idea between, for creation and for creativity. What is that space in which allows for um, one to create, and how does reason come into it, especially for poets, right? When it comes to like actually editing, um, which it seems like it's a use, there's some use for it, when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to that editing process, and knowing when to um, deploy uh,
Mm-hmm.
that
Can,
reason.
can I add something as well?
Of course.
Something my producer said. He mentioned like, yeah, people are afraid to like express because they're afraid to make mistakes. Um, and when you're in like a jam session or just like a freestyle, a low pressure situation, it gives more like freedom unless you think about it too much. Um, and then yeah, another thing that made me think of like my choir director too. Like he'd say like sing out so that we can hear you, so that if you do make a mistake, it's okay. We can just correct it.
Yeah, absolutely. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, allowing that space to play, right? I think that's another thing that we don't necessarily get to experience often. It's like, okay, what does it look like to play? What does it look like to create without expectation? What does it look like to just exist and be, and allow for um, that sound or that thought to actually see its way through to manifestation to the surface without putting anything to block it. Um, yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Susan,
Well, first, I just have to say I love everything you guys just discussed. And I especially appreciate the segue into revision because I'm deep into that as a poet. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to say first and foremost that when I just read the brief version that you sent us, which was all so kind because the book is kind of pricey, you know, for those of us that buy a lot of books, a $30 book is like, right. But I ended up buying the book and I was so glad because right out of the gate, all I did was open it and look at the contents. And I'm like, I feel like I'm home. I just read music, the mysticism of sound, cosmic language, the power of the word, and then phrases to be repeated. And then if I dug in from there, I was like, holy cow. I I I felt like I was holding something really precious immediately in my hand. And I haven't gotten super far in it, but I did read enough. And I tried to especially hit the things that I knew that you had in the handout. And the things that stand out for me immediately are in the silent life, there is no joy, but only peace. The soul's original being is peace, and its nature is joy, both of which work against each other. This is the hidden cause of all of life's tragedy. I was like, if we could bring that single, and that's under vibrations in chapter 2. It's right in the first, it's the second paragraph. If that message could be brought to humanity right now, particularly humanity in the United States of America, right? It's like, can you be with the reality, the existential reality, and still live in love? You know, he's right there, he's saying it. And I love that's under vibration. I'm an architect by training, and I have a background in feng shui. So whenever we talk about vibration, you know, like that is like for me, like the most basic thing, right? Um, and I just love that that's how he starts that out. And then he goes on in the next thing to say the inward and essential part of each and every being is composed of fine vibrations, and the external part is formed of gross ones. And the finer part is named spirit, and the grosser part, matter. That's feng shui. That is the definition of feng shui. The former being less subject to the change and destruction, and the latter more so. All that lives is spirit, and all that dies is matter. I mean, you know, I'm like,
Yeah.
I pretty much I had to stop like every paragraph and go, I just have to sit with this and let it work on me. And I love that you picked this book, and I'm going to read the whole thing, stem to stern. I can't wait for these later chapters that I haven't gotten to yet, where I'm like, the word, I can't wait to read that part because, you know, I'm out the power of the word. And the fact that he ends, I think this is fascinating. I can only imagine what he's going to have to say about phrases to be repeated. Like, what are the things in our life that will enhance it if we repeat them? And I just want to share that I've started a new practice, and I feel like it's inspired by this book. I'm making a point to get up and be awake. I'm usually awake anyway, early in the morning, but I'm putting on I live in Michigan where it's very cold. I'm putting on my clothes, my warm clothes, and I'm going out every morning when the sun rises to behold the sunrise in real life with no window in between, if I can. And then I'm trying, the latter's harder, but to also behold the sunset energetically, because I'm convinced that we've separated ourselves a little bit too far from our mother, and that we need to reconnect our physical well-being to it. And I've been doing it for about a month, and I just want to tell you guys, if you haven't already grokked this one, I feel like it's I hate to even say this in this group, but I feel like it's even better than any meditation I've ever done. Like just 5 minutes of letting the sun hit me in real life. I didn't realize how separated I had become from that. And I think this book has actually strangely been a part of inspiring me to do that, to like get back into reality in a way that we can get separated. And thank God for Zoom, and thank God for our technology, or we wouldn't be here. But yeah, I love this book. Thank you so much for selecting it.
Wow. It's a pleasure. And what a beautiful testament to put um, the reading into practice, right? Because it's one thing to read about vibrations and another to experience vibrations, um, whether that's vibrations that are coming from the sun or the moon or underneath our feet, or that vibration, be it a thought into that we are running in our head consciously or unconsciously, or sound or music, right? So way to like actually put that into practice and see it, experience it for oneself. There's a term uh, in Sufism in Arabic. It's called tahqiq, which is what is that, Khalil? What is tahqiq? Verification?
But haqiq is, yeah, truth, so it'd be like to verify the truth of something.
Right, to verify the truth.
Gurdjieff used an interesting word that nobody really knows in English, but in French it's constatation, which is constatation, which means not just verifying the truth, but verifying the truth internally for yourself as an experience, not just as a proposition.
Can you guys put those words in the chat, like how you spell them? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll put the tahqiq. I don't know, the one Khalil said in French, that one, I'll have him write that one. But yeah, verifying really, like, and like Khalil said, in truth in oneself, in experience. Um, yeah, it's beautiful. Um, for yeah, what a testament. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Susan, for sharing that. And what an inspiration, right? To for myself, honestly, because I'm the one like I was like, man, let me just sleep just another 30 minutes, you know? Um, so wow, thank you so much. Much love. David.
There we go. So I read this book 25 years ago, I think. Yeah, something like that. I was a religion major in as an undergrad, and professor wasn't part of any class I took, but he handed me this book, and I read it. I liked it a lot. And a few years later, I handed it off to a music teacher that I was studying with, pretty intensely, like almost every day, every 5 days a week. I was with this guy for a couple of years, and he's a really kind of serious guy. He was younger than me, but felt ages older than me, kind of feeling. And I gave him the book. I was like, "You should check this out." He was like, "Okay, I'll check it out." And like, I don't know, 3 days later or something, he comes back. He goes, "Stop reading this shit and just practice." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And oh, I didn't know what to make of that. I was kind of like, "All right." And I never cleared it up with him. He wasn't the kind of guy that like had conversations, but I just kind of wanted to see it. I was kind of like trying to get in, I was trying to get in this guy's head. And I was like, check out this book and see what he would say to me. So many years later, okay, we're reading this for book club. And so I start reading it. And I understood what he meant by that. And not to say that I thought the book is bullshit or anything like that. Like, I love it. But it's like someone describing chocolate. It's thauk, right? The taste. And like what you were just saying before, to have this experience, when you have this experience, when you've sort of touched it, and then you're trying to read or like comprehend it in word, it starts to feel difficult. And so I kept thinking like maybe it's the translation. I don't know. And then I'm like, I want to just go play, and so I'm just gonna go play my drum. I'm gonna go practice or I'll meditate or whatever, do recitation or whatever. And so like this poem came to mind by Walt Whitman. It's very short. And I'm saying this not to diss the Hazrat Inayat Khan or the book itself, but it's even in the book itself, it's doing this sort of interplay of like, you hear like this tone of sort of doctrine, things need to be in this particular order, and then this other tone of like pure experience, where you should be really guided by that's good and that's bad. And it's interesting because he's talking throughout the book about, you know, good notes and bad notes, but then there's like this underlying thing going on. Well, there are no bad notes because you can have this intermediary note that resolves everything. So two notes next to each other that feel dissonant, a third note comes in, you create a chord, and it creates a level of harmony between all the notes, right? And anyway, back to the poem. So this is Walt Whitman, When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. Does anyone know this poem? When I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures, were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I sitting heard the astronomer, when I sitting heard the astronomer, where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became, tired and sick, till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in the mystical moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars. And so the feeling, you know, what you have is what he's conveying through this is like both where he's trying to sort of present some level of doctrine, but then he's going more into like his mystical experience of you know, whatever it is. He's had a mystical, whether it's music or God, I don't know. Maybe there's no difference there, I think, for him at least. I've got notes all over it. I'm gonna just kind of like let people talk more, and then I'll maybe like pull parts in and stuff. But that was the experience, and wow, thank you, because it just everything just came full circle. You know, it's this sort of like there's this great picture, I wish I had it, of like in Chan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism, the sixth patriarch was this guy who couldn't read, and there's this picture of him tearing up all of the Buddhist sutras and stomping on them, which are like the most sacred texts. Like you can't, you know, you'd never even see someone put it on the ground or sit on it or like have it below their waist. And this guy's just like,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean that's the thing, right? That we get
oh,
to
I forgot to say, he attained enlightenment from hearing the words. Instant. It was the idea, he was like young and he was just working and he heard someone recite one line from the Diamond Sutra and he instantly attained enlightenment. And so it was sound, this like just pure vibration that had, there was no like good or bad descript like essence to the words. It was just completely like pure.
Hmm.
And so that's what I feel like with what he's describing with the harmony is it's beyond good or bad. Because good and bad are these things that bring us into suffering. When we strive for things that are good and they aren't good, we suffer for it, right? And things that are good don't always last forever. I mean, there's one thing, right? But I don't know. I'm trailing off, so
No, that's spot on. That's completely spot on. Like reading this stuff, which is I think that's what we're talking about as far as like verifying for oneself. And there is a point because even for me reading it the first time, I remember asking myself over and over, like, what do you mean? How does he even know this? Like
Mm.
I'm just reading somebody else's idea of cosmology or idea of um, philosophical idea. Even for me, I love music of sound. I know the power that it has, um, but not yet experienced it enough to that level. So even reading it, it felt there's this distance between the information that he was sharing and my personal experience. And there was some stuff that I read back then for the first read, that this was, a few years ago, that it felt like as if I would just have to trust that whatever this person is saying has some level of truth, or that he's not the only one who's saying these things, but there are actually other people who are verifying that same idea and thought. So therefore, I'm maybe just having some level of faith and trust in that. Um, and reading it the second time after having certain kind of experiences, kind of going through verification, I guess, um, if not fully, but maybe partially, um, if that's even a thing. So it's like reading it again, it's like, oh, now I know what that means. Having experienced, let's say, the power of vibration and chanting and humming, oh, I know why he would say, um, harmony is kind of the ideal that we're all going for, that it's already there, that we don't necessarily need to look for it. It's already there. We just have to train our hearing, which is not just this muscle, but internal hearing, in order to be able to pick up on these things, um, which is very, it's a subtle, that finer thing, and moving in the direction of connecting with that spirit. Kind of goes back to what Susan read, right? Everything that's alive is spirit, and everything um, that dies is matter, or something like that. Like
Yeah.
when we're moving in that direction, um, I speak for myself. When I'm moving in that direction, I'm feeling this finer attunement within that realm that we as a society decided to call spirit, or light, or unseen, or ethereal, or whatever. So yeah, I'm with you. This kind of that space in the beginning is like, I don't know just yet, but I'm gonna trust and move forward. One of the things that, and I spoke. Yes, Khalil said lisan al ghaib. That's right. That's right. Um, One of the things, as I mentioned before, um, hearing him, or reading how he sacrificed music. Um, he wrote, I gave up music because I had received from it all that I have to receive. To serve God, one must sacrifice what is dearest to one. And so I sacrificed my music. I was, um, I was reading that. Um, I got scared just reading it. Um, and then I read it again, which I'm still trying to understand. Why was it so scary for me to have this idea of sacrificing um, music? Um, and then I read it again, and him saying I had received from it all that I can receive, which can be also I gave it all that I can give it, and I received all that I can receive. Um, And there's that power in not prematurely doing something, right? Like to give something up or to accept something in prematurely. So that was, I remember just reading that module. That was like first line before I even get into the reading itself. So yeah, this idea of sacrifice when it comes to, which he kind of talked a little bit later on as far as discipline and master, becoming a master at one's craft as well. David.
I just wanted to quickly respond to what you were saying, and like add a little more context to the idea of him sacrificing his playing. Classical Indian musicians, I mean, it's a caste, you know. I mean, it's a subgroup within the Brahmin caste, and in some cases non-Brahmin caste, but they're expected to just train all day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's their job. And the idea behind that is, you know, is just to be, if you completely immerse yourself in one thing, you just become completely enlightened through that vehicle. That's the idea. So it's even more of a crazy idea that he decided to sacrifice this thing. And I always wonder if it's because he couldn't divide his time between his purely spiritual pursuits and doing music. And in the East, while musicians find some level of sort of enlightenment through music, it's not considered enlightenment at the same level as like Buddhas and you know, and yogis and stuff like that. It's a different thing, and because it comes from more of an aspect of the ego from their perspective.
Beautiful.
So I wonder if that's what happened there. It made me really think. Oh man, that's rough. Like I've tried to not play music because of periods of life where there was more work to do or raising a child, and I thought I could do it, and I just no, it's not possible.
I'm
Even
with
if it
you.
just means me messing around, not really going out and playing, but still, like I have to always have a musical outlet.
Hmm. Yeah.
So that's a pretty intense sacrifice to me.
Yeah. Thank you for the context as well, because I did not know. I think it painted a fuller picture with what you shared. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Susan.
So this is such a great conversation. It makes me think, you know, if we look at the perennial philosophies, if we look across the whole board, you know, one of the things that I think we can all agree on is we see what is asked of us is, are you willing to give up the thing that you are most passionate about, that is your heart of hearts, right? Like every religious text has that story. And I'm not surprised, Osama, at all to hear you say you felt confronted by that, because you're a musician. Like, this book speaks to your heart in a way that I love music deeply, and I play some instruments, but I would never put myself forward to say I'm a musician. And that is confronting, to be asked, or to posit, am I willing to sacrifice the thing that I love the most? And I don't have any answers for that. I just think it's really interesting, because if I think about the things I've come into contact with over my 65 years, that is a theme that repeats over and over and over again. What are you willing to give up? What are we willing to give up? And then what happens on the other end? What is the breakthrough? What is the redemption? on the other end that is possible, right? Traditional religions like, well, there's heaven and there's whatever, you won't go to hell, whatever. And then there's all different variations on that theme. So what a great thing to be thinking about, because we're in that world more than ever, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we all have that, right? Like you said, in our hearts of hearts, we all have that thing that somehow we know this is the thing, or at least I would hope, right? Um, and that question is very confronting. You're absolutely right. And yeah, to put that on the altar and say, okay, here I offer it to you, and without secretly hoping that it will return back multiplied, right? Because we also hear, in the stories like, oh, we sacrificed and it was returned back in multiples,
Yeah.
without
Yeah.
that
There's no
secretly hoping.
guarantee.
Exactly.
Nobody ever said there's a guarantee.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Brother Omar.
Peace, everybody. This has been a beautiful conversation. Yeah, I'm just picking up the thread of this idea of giving up the thing that we love the most. And yeah, as you were talking, it just had me thinking, I wonder if it's the actual giving up of the thing or the passion or the practice that we love the most, or is it giving up our relationship to it, or our identification with it, our attachment to it? I wonder if it's less about giving up the thing itself as much as it is surrendering my own idea of who I am in relationship to that thing. So if I'm a musician, am I giving up music, or am I giving up the image of me as a musician performing and being successful, etc.? Because actually giving up music doesn't actually seem like the solution here, or maybe in some cases it is, but if like one's dharma or one's purpose or the gift that the divine has given us or any one of us is the gift of music, and that's what's creating light and rippling light, I don't know that giving that up is what we're being asked to do as much as giving up our egoic idea of, oh, I'm the musician. Like what Aziza was saying, the quote of, people praise me, but it's not really me that's playing. It's the great musician, capital M. And so that right there is, I see that as him giving up. He's giving it up. He's giving himself up. And I think that's like a tremendous feat to both remain in your dharma or your service while not taking credit for what you're doing, whether it's music or anything else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I believe also there's levels to it, right? Like one can be confronted um, at the at different levels of that identification, right? So if that identification is with the practice itself or the image of the practice. People say like, oh, you know, people who are in relationship, like, oh, you're not really in love with that person, but you're in love with the idea of that person. So if one has enough awareness and observation of the situation to know what the identification is with, and to be able to let go of that. Because you're right, because even in the text itself, um, he wrote, one should never think or speak against one's desire, for it weakens the thought vibration and often brings about contrary results. Right? Like, where, like, how does that fit into the whole conversation? So I'm with you on that, Omar, for sure. Khalil.
Yeah, just riffing off this same idea with you guys. Fascinating how that story, of course, that the ultimate example of that story in Quran is Ibrahim's attempted sacrifice of Ismail, of course, because Ibrahim so identified with his firstborn son, and here Allah comes and tells him, no, you got to give him up. The really fascinating thing, though, in connection to our discussion in music is that, of course, Ismail means the one who listens to God, or the listener, right? So here's Ibrahim, totally identified with the way he thinks he listens to God, right? And Ibrahim sitting around going, oh, I know exactly what God wants to tell me. I listen to him all the time. And Allah says, do you? Let's test that out, right? Until Jibril comes along, and Jibril, of course, stops the whole thing once it's proven that, Ibrahim is willing to make that sacrifice of the way he thinks he listens to God. And Jibril, of course, means the strength of God. So what Ibrahim gives up in attempting to sacrifice the way he thinks Ismail, listens to God, he gets the Jibril. He gets the strength of God.
Man, that was mind blowing. That I loved that interpretation, and that perspective. Wow, amazing, amazing. This is something
Little
really,
Quranic wisdom for you.
yeah, yeah. um, yeah, that's gonna be something for contemplation, for sure, for sure. Um, Amazing, absolutely amazing. I don't even know how to pick this up and beautiful. Well, okay, here Alman comes to the rescue.
There was another paragraph that I read that was kind of refreshing. It was a paragraph talking about right and wrong, the conception or concept of right and wrong, good and evil, sin and virtue. And he kind of brings it to a very subtle place, or a very, I don't know, I found it pretty down to earth, um, where he says, every disturbance, therefore, caused to the peace of the smallest part of existence affects the individual or the soul. And then he says, thus, any thought, speech, or action that disturbs peace is wrong, evil, and a sin. Life being like a dome, its nature is also dome-like. Disturbance of the slightest part of life disturbs the whole, and returns as a curse upon the person who caused it. Any peace produced on the surface comforts the whole, and thence returns as peace to the producer. So I just really like this idea of right and wrong not being some static, rule-based, dogmatic thing, but it's really, yeah, it's vibration, it's energetic, it's are we contributing to wholeness, or are we contributing to dissonance and disturbance? And it's like, yeah, are the words that we speak, the actions that we do, are they contributing to connection and bringing people together, or is it fracturing that, and like that being a basis for so-called right and wrong? Yeah, I just found it refreshing from somebody who's like, yeah, I mean, a religious leader in a way, even though, yeah, he's a universalist, but I find it refreshing just in the discourse of like, yeah, right and wrong in religious context.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think um, in the religious context and in from like an individual experience, right? When it comes to ourself and how I speak for myself, how easily um, I fall into self-judgment, right? Um, so bye, Aziza. Happy New Year. How easily I fall into self-judgment, right? Whether it's an emotion that I judge as good or bad, whether it's a thought or an action, and to be able to refine that into a state of less of that judgment towards myself and others, and more dynamic um, way of approaching myself and approaching that love, to have it be more expanding and more understanding, more room for understanding. Um, and even, we see that even within, let's say, kind of like what David shared earlier, that there isn't any wrong note, even within music or within sound itself, right? Um, it's just where does it fit and how does it fit with a greater harmony, right? Um, so yeah, yeah, absolutely. David.
Yeah, as I was just going to add to what Omar was saying, and I was mentioning this earlier, how he does this thing where he goes between, where he talks about things that are good and bad, and like karma almost. He has like this concept of karma, right? And it expresses in vibratory ways, or at least that's the imagery that he's using to express it. But then he says something like this: the next aspect of individual harmony is practiced in one's contact with another. Every being has an individual ego produced from his own illusion. This limits his view, which is led to the direction of his one interest, and he judges of good and bad. Through this limited view, which is generally partial and imaginary rather than true. Um, so he just does these things where like he kind of like puts your mind in this one place and then kind of really flips it. And because I mean, I think from what I just read, he's kind of implying like no one can really actually say what is really good and what is really bad, because we all just have the thing that directs us, and that direction is what causes us to think in terms of this thing is good because it relates in a good way to that way I want to go, and this thing is bad because it relates in a bad way to the way I want that to go. And music is a perfect example of that, because everyone has their tastes. Not, I mean, very few people like everything, or genuinely like listen to something. Oh, that for everything. Sometimes you hear something, you're like, oh, I don't know. I guess some people like it. I don't know. You know. And I know for myself, from an early age, that made me curious. When I would hear something and it would be sort of dissonant to my liking, I was like, oh, what's going on there? Like, why would people like that? I want to know. I want to know, why do you like that? And through knowledge, you like learn, it takes a lot, you know, like let's say I live in one place and I want to learn about some cultural thing in another place. It requires me to learn a lot more than just that one thing. I have to learn about the entire culture that surrounds that thing, because that's all the information that fed into that one thing. And so it's hard for some people to think that's still good, because it like somehow is dissonant to their understanding of things. And so they just put up a wall rather than say, well, what is it about my sort of framework that makes that irritating to me? And I should investigate that.
That's, yeah, absolutely. Like that particular example, which is pretty um universal in a sense, meaning that we all know what that means, what that feels like, right? When we listen to music, they're like, oh, I love that music. This is definitely my taste within the realm of music that I enjoy. And then when listening to other kind of music, it's like, nah, this is not something that is particularly my taste. And but you're right, there's that question of like, wait a second, but there's a whole audience, there's a whole population of people that listen to that music. How come? Why? How? What is it that they're here that I'm not hearing? Um, which is like, I remember, I don't know, maybe like 5 years, 5, 6 years ago. So I was like, the main music that I would listen to is hip hop, right? Like that's it. It was just hip hop when I first early, early teens, and then I moved to the US and it was just hip hop. The beats that I'm making are just hip hop. And about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a moment where I stopped listening to music. I was like, look, I'm not gonna listen to music. Um, and then when I started to listen to music, it became Persian classical music, which like Persian classical music, I would listen to it before and I'm like, there's no way, this is too boring or whatever. Like, it would just be, mind you, I don't speak Persian, like I don't even understand, um, you know, but that for some reason during that time of my life development or whatever, we're always developing. That was the soundtrack for that moment. That became the soundtrack for that moment of my life, and it just took hold of me, and I would just listen to Persian sitar and Persian death and Persian poetry, and it's like I got lost in it. Um, so yeah, I think it's such a beautiful um, inquiry for us. You know, how is it that and it can be as challenging as we want, or maybe as we don't have to go far outside of that comfort of our taste, right? Like it can go into like real death metal kind of all the way there, and maybe it doesn't have to go that far, but well, somebody, maybe that's somebody's comfort zone. Whatever the opposite of that comfort zone, I guess. Um, yeah. Susan.
Well, I just because it's a segue, I love this whole conversation. My son has a metal band, and he's introduced me to so much music that I would never have listened to in a million years. And he made me actually appreciate and understand um, lots of music that I would not have listened to. And I'm an older mother. He's only 26. So, but we don't go to his gigs these days. I just check in and go, how was it? And he goes, it was great, Mom. And I'm like, great. So I don't go anymore because I know I can't be in that environment. It just, it's so dissonant for me. So I just needed to say that because I love that conversation about, I consider myself fairly open-minded about music, but there's certain music that is just, I can't, I don't know. And I don't think it's just about being older. So anyway, but I wanted to come back to a number of things that you guys have talked about that there's a reason I love to come to this book club because you get my mind going. You know, we were talking about sacrifice and we were talking about all these interesting topics. And at one point I said to something Omar said, I think this idea of sacrifice is this idea that you need to be willing. It's not that you have to sacrifice. You just have to prove you're willing to sacrifice. I think Khalil even spoke to that. And I said in the chat, I think it's a false flag for the ego. And I don't even know if it was like a intuitive comment. I don't know that I really thought it through. But while you guys were talking, I went and looked at some of the other things in the book that I had outlined where I had read. And I found two things that I thought were apropos. And I'll just read them. And they're also in the chapter about vibrations. So one on page 151 was, all things and being in the universe are connected with each other, visibly or invisibly. Through vibrations, a communication is established between them on all planes of existence. And then later in the same paragraph, he says, the reason why plants and animals can perceive the vibrations and know of coming events while man is ignorant of them is because he has blinded himself with egotism. And I just thought I would bring it back to the earlier conversation, because for me personally, this is something that's very present for me, that I'm very actively working on. The whole idea of egotism, humility, false humility, all of that, like as a writer, being more visible in my world where I don't want to be visible necessarily. Like, I don't think I want to be visible, but then I'm like, who's talking? What's that conversation? So I just thought I'd bring that back into the conversation because I do think there's something really powerful. You know, we can go into Jungian psychology and everything else, but about the power of you know, the self and what is in control and who are you listening to, right? And I think this book has a lot to say about that. And who would have thought? But I think it's there in spades, maybe.
Wow, beautiful. And absolutely, I think that's one thing that maybe we can all come in agreement about, is that this individual journey on the path, right? And the things that we're confronting, and what the nefs, as Antoine is writing in the chat, what is the ego, this egotism that's blinding us on the way. Um, these, acting as veils. And I think somewhere in the book he also is talking about this, how it acts as veils of darkness, where light is not, penetrating all the way through. And for us to examine that, to observe that, right? And one thing that I love, and I think this goes in between what you read, Susan. I have like the whole paragraph highlighted, where he says every emotion arises from the intensity of the vibration, which when active in different emotions, the main cause of every emotion being simply activity, every vibration, while active, raises the consciousness to the outermost surface, and the mist caused by this activity collects clouds, which we call emotions. The clouds of emotion obscure the clear sight of the soul. Therefore, passion is called blind. The excess of activity of vibrations not only blinds, but weakens the will, and the weak will enfeebles the mind and body. And I think it goes with this, even the whole idea of sacrifice and willing and all of these things. And in a way, the way that I understood that paragraph, which goes with what you're saying as far as how the ego veils uh, us, you know, from our true selves and all that kind of, um, the way that I understood that is, you know, the power of self-observation, and that it gets, the finer it gets, the more we can pick up on um, these quote unquote triggers, or these things, these vibrations that before they even arise, before they come to the surface as emotions and then start to become to blind us from what's really going on, from reality, capital R. When we start to fine tune ourselves, we now start to pick up on maybe the mist before it becomes a cloud. Maybe we can start to pick up on these little things, um, and obviously, like without judgment, allow them to dissipate, um, and you know, take their own course. But that whole chapter, I felt like there was so much as far as um, direction on how to handle the path. There was so much instruction, that's the word, that I felt in that chapter, as far as like how to deal with these things. What can one do? What kind of practices, right? And to him, as a musician, he saw listening and hearing as one of those things. Um, so yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Susan. Khalil.
Yeah, back on the topic of different styles of music and why some styles rub people the wrong way, while others just really dig it. You know, Hazrat Inayat Khan begins the book talking about the concept of the that, right? And I just in general, I love how the Arabic word that is like you are that, right? This is the essence of everything. So um, let me rewind just a little to show you to lead up to what I'm talking about here. So three people can be sitting in the exact same room, and it may seem like it's the exact same room, but because each one perceives the environment with his or her own nafs through a certain structure of perception and conception, each person is actually going to see a totally different room. And the reason for that is because they're actually not in a room. They are in the that of Allah. They're in the total combinatorial explosive environment of any information that can possibly come in. And so what those three people are doing is each individual, each nafs, is selecting out or realizing the relevance of certain features of that environment that's going to fit into that nafs conception of reality. Now, if they're just talking, if they're not listening to music together, if they're just talking, it might seem confusing because those people are saying totally different things and making totally different observations about the quote unquote same room that they're in. But in fact, they're not in the same room because they're selecting out parts of Allah's essence, the that, which they choose. Now, it's interesting, an observation that the German philosopher Schopenhauer made. He said that of all the things that have been given to us to kind of perceive the will of the divine, music is the most accurate, like it penetrates to the heart of the will of the divine. And you can totally see that in the way three different people can like each have their own taste in music. And it's like, wow, how can you think? I mean, let's just totally take, I'm going to take three kinds of music that I just don't get. I can't stand. So Western opera, right? Like, what are they doing? Why are they making those sounds? Western classical minimalism, or not minimalism, but like, you know, John Cage and, or 12 tone theory music, you know, Viennese, Austrian, crazy noise, and then, you know, American Western pop. And yet, the reason each of those uh, souls is receiving something from that connects with their soul. So, like I know some people who just dig opera. I mean, opera is everything. They're total, right, fans of opera. And that's because they're selecting out those vibrations of the divine will that suit their sensibilities, their expectations, their culture, whatever. So I think, you know, it's really beautiful the way if we're really willing to empathize with another and to step into the shoes of another, to really, like I think David was talking about it, try to see it, or maybe Osama, I'm not sure which you guys were talking about, but try to see it from from that perspective, right? And if somehow I could force myself to just get, you know, Schoenberg's 12 tone theory music or something like that, I will have known, I will be able to know that nafs, that reality, that way of understanding Allah's truth from that perspective.
Absolutely. So beautifully expressed, so beautifully, and the way you painted the picture, Khalil, is so beautiful and it's multi-layered. I loved it. Um, yeah, to connect to that nafs or even nefas, that breath of the divine, right? Expressing itself um, in that mode, that way. So, yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Or also that self, right? Because nafs is also the self.
Exactly, that
So
self.
experiencing the divine self through the relative self.
Right, right. Amazing. Um, David, I'll come to you. I know Antoine raised his hand. I don't know if it was before, if he, all good.
It was just basically about what Susan and Khalil was talking about, that whole idea that the mind cannot have a mood on an abstract basis. So if it does experience something that's divine, immediately it being a meaning making machine will color it based on its own conditioning. And so we have what we see here in this book. I think that like and it's not to take anything away from the sacredness and the significance of it, because I feel like there is such thing as celestial perception, and you hear these people who are having these divine experiences across the board, identifying certain aspects of reality that seem to be across the board synonymous, and all the mystics are speaking in one voice. They're pointing out similarities from the different ends of the earth, from the different traditions and religions that ring true. So although there's this thing happening with the mind projecting onto the human experience or the divine experience what its conditioning is, there is some sort of primordial structure to, I guess, this ineffable that we can't not really color with our words. And I hear this guy in his book, he goes, for me, he goes into this, and I guess this could be a theme for me seeing through my own perception too, this poetic thing when he's expressing, where it's not just this logical mind. He's not just speaking about like this is this and this is this. There's this ecstasy that he's speaking from, that he's raptured up in. For instance, when he speaks about giving over his music, I know what he said, and somehow I hear it as a falling away. Not like he had to give this thing which he loved so much. It was that he was filled so much with this bliss or ecstasy or this presence of God that that which was his identity before is no longer his identity. But I'll stop there.
Amazing. Thank you, Antoine. Beautiful. David.
I forgot what I was going to say. I got caught up in listening to Antoine.
I'd love to make a comment on that. So that's such a good point, Antoine, that you just made. I'm like, oh, so isn't that fascinating? Our interpretation was sacrifice, and you just put on the table a different interpretation. It's much more empowering, which makes me wonder. It's like, why do we jump to sacrifice? Because I know I did. I'm like, just taking responsibility and going, oh, yeah. Like, again, the ask is maybe not we're so black and white, right? On the physical plane of reality, it's black and white, yes and no. And there's these subtleties that sometimes we leave on the table that we don't see. And you just brought the subtlety back. And I really appreciate that, because I heard something that opens up the whole conversation for me in a much bigger way than the word sacrifice, which is a shutting down. You reframed it. So thank you for that. Like a willingness. Just be willing.
Yeah. So beautiful. I know when we're having such immersed conversations, time take its own thing, and it's already 9:30, and I want to make sure before we depart, I want to give the space to RM, to Lean, and Abraham. If you'd like, if you have any thoughts, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have any thoughts, any final thoughts, we would love to hear from you if you're in a space to speak, and if you have any final words. Yeah, or in the chat as well. Yeah, and to Antoine, it's 2:30 right now, so it's not 9:30 yet. We can pretend that we're all in Portugal right now.
What a beautiful conversation is the only thing that I want to start off by saying. The second thing is there was a question that kind of came up. I don't know if it was Khalid, you were saying something, or David was saying something, Susan was saying something, Antoine was saying something, or Salma was saying something. I guess that needs to show me the fact that I need to learn how to listen if I want to hear the music of the eternal. But that's a whole other conversation. Call number 2. But the question that came up was in the morning for me, that tied into a thought that kind of sparked the beginning of this call. In the morning, I had the opportunity to wake up either by fate, happen chance, or just nature taking its course at 5 in the morning, and I'm up from an incredible dream. And my wife and I, we had a conversation over breakfast at 5:30 in the morning, so 30 minutes after we woke up. And we were talking about the gap in human history that's completely not available to us in written form or on CDs or Spotify for us to listen to. And as we're really thinking about it, that 200, I mean, it depends on whose perspective here, but for our morning breakfast table conversation, 200,000 years of a gap plus. The question that came up to me, and I wrote this down so I don't forget it, was if sound and vibration form the essence of creation, could that gap in our history be less about missing records and more about a collective forgetting? It's almost like this sense of amnesia, of attunement to this, dare I say it, cosmic harmonies that seems to happen, quite frankly, to almost guide us. And what is the ability for us to refine our tastes, to stretch our capacities in the here and now before we just fade away? Even the fading away is our destiny. I mean, I can almost say that almost appears to be true, but to fade away by us choosing to do so rather than it just happening to us again and again and again. So that's the thought that came to me, is how do we learn how to taste? And then the third thing, Khalid, you brought up Gurdjieff. I'm and a lot of people on this call know that I'm fascinated by this enigmatic person as one of the people that I'm fascinated by. And there's another man too, actually, who we talked about before. They would practice not just with music, because I mean, in Gurdjieff, we have Thomas D. Hartman, amazing compositions that were all done not just to shock, but to awaken, to break through this comprehension and learning how to listen, this deep level of attunement. But even with food, I mean, how many times more often than not do I not even know how to actually taste food and the finer foods of life? Two, things that I think go less discussed in spiritual circles, which I think should be in spiritual discourse, sexuality and the stigmas on sexuality. And what does that actually appear to be in a healthy form? So all those things came up. I don't know the answers, but I am absolutely grateful to be in this caravan with each of you and just listening. As I tell everybody, I'm just a flea on a donkey's ass. So I'm happy to I'm happy to be able to listen and soothe out this refinement for this process. So just deep gratitude for you all. A lot of love. It was really profound to be a fly on the wall, truly, or a flea on a donkey's butt, for preference.
I just have to say, Abraham, I'm so glad you spoke and that you shared that with us. It was really impactful. Thank you.
Since we're talking about music, I was trying to do my listening to refine it more.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that space of which that vibration or that gap, kind of like what you said, like that amnesia, that collective amnesia, and that attunement, remembrance, right? I mean, that's the practice of the, as described, in the dhikr or by the Sufis and others, is this practice of remembrance. So that amnesia is dealt with, right? And I think Susan is going to get to that part in the book, in the entire book, because in the end it talks about phrases to repeat, or to kind of raise this thought vibration, and having that be settled within the heart, and expand that love.
I was going to ask you if you're going to do like a part 2 book club of this book.
We should. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because I think that's really powerful, right? Because which is pretty much, that's what I heard Abe ask, right? Like, how does one wake up from that amnesia, not just individually, but collectively, and where that 200, whatever it is, whatever thousands of years gap is not, it's just back, and he, Inayat Khan kind of talked about that, and I think you read it, Susan, as far as like being able to tap into the past, present, and future, into that space, into that essence that's beyond space and time, that space of remembrance, and to be able to hear the divine's remembrance of us in that space as well. Um, so absolutely beautiful, Abe. Thank you so much. RM joined in the chat, and she wrote about the vibration of gratitude. Vibration of gratitude is like eating high quality food for the soul, which enhances the immunity, strength, and help us build the muscle of the soul, which is, yeah, I can definitely feel that, um, that vibration of gratitude and thankfulness, um, of that. Um, I personally have done verification on using different types of sound. For example, using um, binaural waves while exercises, using walking meditation while practicing Allahu meditation. Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, these one of the things, like talking about that, I mean, now we're definitely over time, but talking about that exercise, like when I work out, which is not often, I can't listen to music. I just can't. I'm too focused on the music, and I'm so not interested in doing any form of exercise whatsoever. I'm like way too in. So it's one thing when I see people like, oh, I have a workout list and it's this song and that song, and I'm like, oh man, I'd probably be listening to the music and not doing any kind of form of exercise. So, but it's probably something that, um, that can play with, which Abraham has great experience with that because he practices capoeira, which is movement and dance and music and martial arts and internal act, which is absolutely beautiful. It's amazing. Uh, Even just listening to him talk about it, and I experienced it like once or twice with him. But without further ado, I mean, like Susan said, maybe it will be something that we can further discuss in another talk, God willing, inshallah. I just want to say thank you all so very much for joining us, and for being, I'm speaking selfishly here, for being amazing teachers to me, um, and for sharing your wisdom and be companions on the path. I'm forever grateful and honored to be on this caravan with you. Thank you so much. Um, Stay tuned for the next um, reading, or if we're going to continue this for maybe February, God willing. I'll send emails out. And if you are in the New Jersey area and you would like to experience music, be immersed in it, we do have sema ceremonies, which are like Sufi whirling dervish kind of music. David came to one of those events. We usually have these once a month here in Montclair, and we also have it once a month in Brooklyn. So if you'd like to experience that in person and feel what chanting and vibrations can do to one's experience, please come on and join us. It would be an honor. Um, I love you all so very much and can't wait to see you next month, God willing.
See you,
Good
everyone. Have
night.
a good night.
Love y'all. Good
Beautiful
night.
one.